Ladies and gentlemen, now the T20 Argentina is honored to present Marcos Peña, Argentine Chief of the Cabinet of Ministers, to take part in the T20 Summit. Please, let's welcome him on the stage.
José.
Hello, how are you? Good to see you.
Muchas gracias por venir.
Can you hear me? Yes. So we are really and finally on our last session. I'm very honored to have Chief of Cabinet Marcos Peña here. Thank you so much for coming here. We started today at 8:30, and yesterday was also like 12 hours of debate. We had more than 60 sessions, 200 panelists. It was really a big summit. We're very happy about that. Let me give you one indicator of this summit. There were today 70,000 people. I am not mistaken. 70,000 people following online the streaming, and there are many people at this moment listening to the streaming of this session. So very glad to have you here for the final session. So the idea is to have a dialogue and a conversation. Marcos came in January when we had the Inception workshop. Most of you were here. And actually then, when Marcos was here, he promised that Mauricio Macri would come to receive the communiqué. And he did came yesterday, so thank you so much for that. And here, José María Lladós, Executive Director of CARI, Nora Lustig from Tulane University, you heard her today, Colin Bradford from Brookings Institution, and Margot Thomas from Chatham House. So we'll have time for a dialogue with Marcos. Let's start by Margot. Would you like to ask Marcos Peña a question?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate Argentina under this presidency and the leadership that you've shown. We spent a good chunk of time in the last 2 days talking about the benefits of having women as economic actors and recognizing their contribution to economic growth and this gender dividend, half of the world's population, and what it means. And it was very encouraging that Argentina, in your presidency, demonstrated leadership by indicating the objective of mainstreaming the gender discussion, incorporating this gender focus across the G20 initiatives. Now that you've probably had a chance to take a look at the process, do you think that the goals that were originally intended have been achieved? And then I have a follow-up in terms of how does Argentina intend to carry that forward within the Argentinian context, but as part of your influence in shaping the G20 agenda going forward?
Okay, first, good evening and welcome to Buenos Aires, and congratulations for the great work you've done along these months. I read the communiqué also, and it was very interesting to see the exercise of dialogue and consensus and thinking that such a large group of think tanks and people from all around the world have done in this T20. So we think that it's something that fills us with pride that we can have this type of encounter here in Buenos Aires, in this great place. And second, Margot, I think that I would separate in two aspects. I think that the commitment to pushing the gender agenda and to recognize its importance and its transversal significance is something that is probably something that should be more natural in the future. It's something so obvious in a way that we hope that quickly it won't be necessary, or as soon as possible not be necessary to recognize it as something worthwhile telling, something it should be much more incorporated, because that will permit us, in a way, to advance in the second aspect, that is more concrete results. We feel in our local agenda in our country that this debate is more present in society and in the public debate than necessarily in the representation in institutions. And many times we see in the representation of different aspects of our social life a very low representation of women still in important aspects of institutional life. But I think that if we work both aspects, it's important not to get frustrated, because it would be, I think, a mistake to stop or to only permit yourself debating the aspects if there is a perfect representation. I think that, in a way, separating both things can permit us to advance, even understanding that in each society there will be different levels of advance in terms of representation. Said that, in our government, in terms of public officials, but especially also in Congress, there has been a very active participation of women, and we've had a very sensitive debate this year in terms of the debate about abortion in our country, where there has been a very strong participation of women advocating for both postures or for different postures. But we think that that was something that's very interesting in terms of permitting ourselves debating all aspects, even the aspects that are more controversial and that apparently divide us more, but that can permit us to agree on how we debate those things that divide us, understanding that in a plural and diverse society, there will always be aspects that divide us, but we have to be united in how we debate it.
Thank you, Marcos. This year was the first time that the T20 had a task force on gender economic equity, so we worked a lot on that issue, and Margot was one of the co-chairs of the task force. And now I give the floor to Colin for a question. Colin is one of the founding fathers of the T20, so maybe you want to go back to the origins of the T20, or feel free to ask Marcos.
As I said in Berlin a few months ago, nobody who was present at the creation of the T20 ever expected it to become as grand and as large as this is and as inclusive as it is. In an inclusive economy, social cohesion have been two themes of the T20 and your G20. I know from our previous discussions in February that this is an area that's really sensitive for you. And you've had tough times since February, no question about it. You're in the kind of crosshairs between the exigencies of fiscal requirements and the commitments to better social outcomes. So we had a session this afternoon on visioning the future as a political act. And the idea behind this, there's a Vision 20 grouping inevitably in this arrangement. The idea behind visioning the future as a political act is that especially when you're in the crosshairs of the kinds of tensions that you are, is that you lift your sights, not only the government, but the nation, lifts its sights, looks forward, uses its imagination and its resources and its consultation and participation to imagine a better future, a realistic future, but a better future than we have today. And what's helpful about this is it relieves some of the immediate tensions in order to embrace hope for a better future. So the question I would ask you is this a helpful framework in the current circumstances, or is it a diversion? And second, but that's really a trivial question. The question is, how would you navigate from where you are today, which isn't where everybody wanted to be, to the future Argentina wants?
Okay, I think that there are two aspects, no? One more structural about what we're living now and what we're trying to do in confronting these challenges, that in a way are similar challenges to what we have encountered when we received government almost 3 years ago, but with different circumstances that have accelerated the challenges. But we think that there are at least three challenges in this first aspect. One, the conviction that macroeconomic stability is a first condition for social equity and the possibility of development for a society. And we have had a track record of long history of not understanding that apparently, and we think we are on the correct path to really resolve this in a structural way and with a very transparent and honest approach to it, to understand that all our problems are self-inflicted, and that's the good news, is that they all have solutions. But we have to have the leadership and the clarity to tackle them and to solve them, and we are doing that. Second, it's the first time in our history that we are confronting a large economic or macroeconomic crisis with the conviction of passing it with the same rules that when we entered the crisis, understanding that building an institutional framework and rule of law and predictability is a key for the trust we need to have for the long-term development and the engagement with the world. And those are the two pillars that serve us very well to not lose the path in the middle of the storm, to be clear to where we're going. And third, which is not least important, is that we're doing it with a very, very important investment in social protection. We are doing it taking care of the most vulnerable parts of our society and understanding that that is a key for all our society to do the crossing to the other side to a more stable and developed country. That we cannot do that leaving one part behind. We have to do it with everybody in an inclusive way. And this confronts itself with the volatility and the context of the world, where we have to understand that, especially it's a challenge for our society, which has been always more inward-looking than outward-looking, to understand that we have to do what we have to do and what we have the resources to resolve some of the problems, but we also have to understand that we are part of a global community that will probably confront us with new challenges and new situations that we can't even predict today. And that's why the importance for us of this space of G20 in general, and in particular of T20, to understand what's happening in the world, to open our eyes and open our ears and participate in a global conversation, so we can find new opportunities or to leapfrog processes which other countries have already learned, but also to raise our voice to say we need these consensus, we need these ideas, we need everybody to look at this perspective, because we're doing our best to be part of this world, but we also have a perspective of learning of things that haven't gone well or of the needs of countries like ours. So I think that the perspective is very, very useful, because sometimes in the day by day we can lose perspective of the challenges and also of where we are.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colin was talking about social cohesion, and Nora gave a marvelous speech, a lecture on inequality. Nora also is part of the G20 eminent group persons. Nora, would you like to pose a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks for being here. And I guess, my question is going to be on the IMF. The IMF has attempted to transform itself for the last 10 years from a pontificating and almost cruel institution that dictated to countries to adjust, or even if all hell broke loose, it didn't matter, to one that wants to be a partner and help countries do the adjustment in the best way possible, including taking care of the most vulnerable and the poor. And everybody now is watching what's happening with Argentina. It's not your litmus test, it's the IMF's litmus test. Is the IMF, you think, performing? Is it walking the talk?
Yes, definitely. We have approached the relationship in the idea of working as a team. We have felt a great trust and confidence in terms of working together, debating a lot of hours, especially our team on the ground that's working the different aspects of the program, And we have not always been fully agreed on one point or other, but always have had a lot of care in terms of working together in terms of objectives and of perspectives and respect to the role of each other. And looking at our historic perspective, we understood from the first day that the IMF also was a little bit afraid that the history would be repeating itself in terms of the Argentine government blaming the IMF for the problems. And we have been very clear, and I think the leadership of President Macri has been very important in that aspect, to say we understand that the IMF is coming to try to help, not somebody, it's not a scapegoat where we have to generate the blame for our problems, because our fiscal irresponsibility in our history or our history of being defaulters, it's our responsibility. So in that aspect, I think it's also a contribution that's in the same line as the approach we had to the WTO ministerial meeting in December of last year, or of the G20 presidency, or any other engagement with multilateral organizations. It's the idea of understanding that, that for countries like ours, these institutions can be allies for building framework, for building cooperation, for working together, and that the idea of demonizing them or to blame them for our problems is not necessarily very constructive perspective. No? So from the head of the IMF, Madame Lagarde, to all the team, David Lipton, and all the team that has been working here on the ground, we have found really a great idea of teamwork, of professionalism, and also of a lot of help.
Thank you. We have some minutes left, probably for one or two more questions. And also, I would like, Marcos, to thank you and the Argentine government for the exchange that we had over these months. When you came in January, everybody was surprised that it was such a collaborative effort that wasn't that clear before in previous years. And I think from that moment on, we had an excellent exchange over the months with the different working groups, with the Sherpa track and also with the finance track. So thank you so much for the support. Margot, Colin, we would like to take...
I'd like to, I think you explained very clearly that the government is committed, and you've created space. You've really engaged in the women and underrepresented groups as you're forging a path forward. One of our economists earlier today said, in times of austerity, however, invariably it's women at the bottom of the pyramid who are disproportionately affected. As you go forward and as you make new policies, do you see this as an opportunity to ensuring that there is a gendered focus in your policy making, in your policy discussion, to ensure that you don't leave this very important economic group behind? Because invariably we see that this happens fairly consistently.
Well, I think that first, I would say that when you have structural poverty like we have for some years now, and a populist or clientelar approach to social policy or to economic development, what you have is a disempowerment of society in general, and probably even more in terms of women's roles. But it's a more structural problem, because what we lived in our country is that many times this approach to poverty is an approach that limits empowerment to people and forces almost like a forced gratitude to the things that the central government gives you. Almost a permanent attack to the dignity and the autonomy of a person as a potential transformer of its society. We heard before when somebody that governed before our country saying some people think they have their jobs or their education because of their merit, and that's false. It's because of the collective project gave it to them. No? So the basic transformation we're trying to get along in our country is a structural perspective in terms of empowering people, in terms of their civil rights, in terms of their leadership in transformation society, and also in their leadership in terms of the economic entrepreneurship and development of a different transformation of the economy. And in particular, we have the gender perspective for a lot of these issues. But I think that when you see them as two visions, we feel that women many times are the most get the worst part in a way, in a more populist scheme. We think that today women in general, and women in particular, young girls in the different places of our country, that can transform reality in terms of their leadership or their tools, have a better perspective. But we have to maintain, as we said before, the idea of having a close focus, because such a large country as ours has a very different situation in different parts. There are some parts that are more innovative or more progressive in terms of women's rights, and some that are more backwards, and we have to work in terms of pushing all the agenda along.
Right. And of course, it's not just a rights issue. As I tend to quote Christine Lagarde in situations like this, she says, women's economic empowerment is not just a moral imperative, it's an economic no-brainer. And we have proof of the economic benefits. So it's just ensuring that we bring that along and recognize that policies that we think are gender blind, in fact, do discriminate against women.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are telling me that there were some questions also from think tank leaders in the audience. If someone wants to pose a question. You know probably who is going to ask you. Rafael Estrella.
It's a great pleasure to see you here, sitting in this audience, and you know the reasons why. We have been talking throughout these 2 days of global issues, local effects, national policies. Maybe if we have to take a mantra, it will be a multilateralism. But very few times we have heard here talking about regional cooperation or regional integration. My point is, to what extent Argentina, which will host the G20, has coordinated with the 2 other countries of the region who are part of the G20, because up to this moment, such a kind of relationship didn't exist. And I've been told it has existed, but I would like you to tell us.
Thank you. Yes, from the first day we talked with Brazil and Mexico about the idea of working a common agenda, and that has been working along the whole year, although the bad luck maybe in this situation is that they both lived presidential election process during this year in a way that I think reduced the possibilities of deepening it, at least at presidential level. No, it has been working in terms of Sherpa level, and that has been a positive experience, and also with Chile, who's also, as our invited country this year, also participated in that conversation. So we have had these 3 years in a more general perspective, a very changing neighborhood with a lot of countries going through presidential elections and changes in government. And we have always tried to maintain the efforts of integration in a political level and an economic level in multilateral institutions like the OEA, or also in terms of our trading blocs like Mercosur, or with the dialogue with Pacific Alliance. And we have had an approach of being flexible in terms of those changes we have been living in all the countries of the region. And also an experience we've had in terms of the interrelation with almost all the Western Hemisphere in these 3 years. Almost all of the countries that are participating in G20 today have different governments than when we arrived in government almost 3 years ago. And in some of them that have had also changes in their cabinet staff or changes in the people that are responsible for it. And I think that's also a huge challenge today for multilateralism, because when you have to restart relationships permanently, it's something that maybe it's not so much in the perspective of the analysis, but it's very important in terms of the perspective of government, because personal relationships are very important in terms of how we work together at the presidential level or at the team level. But yes, we hope that in the summit we can show, probably we'll have new government already in office from Mexico, and almost at the same date, and also the Brazilian government.
Do you have, Marcos, sorry, do you have time for some other
sure.
question?
Sure, no problem.
Well, over there, yes. Why don't you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Anbu Murali from IRIA, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. Actually, my question is more about the G20 and the Argentina. The G20 has evolved as a kind of innovation, as a response to the financial crisis. And it was successful in responding to it by having the macro policy coordination. But during the course, basically it evolved basically as a control force of global economic governance into kind of a guardian for the social issues. There are also some courses, some people, they basically question the relevance of the G20. In your opinion, and what is the comparative advantage Argentina has as a part of this G20 group and hosting this G20 summit? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that in one perspective, one of our comparative advantages is our learning process of a lot of things we can share of how not to do things. And it's not a minor contribution in the times where the world is debating a lot of things. We have at least a catalog of experiences of things that haven't worked. And in a way, we also can show, I think, from that perspective and from the balance we try to have as an Argentine government of the self-esteem of trying to be chairing the G20 as we offer ourselves at the beginning of our government, which was something that a lot of people said, well, these guys are very ambitious in terms of what they're grabbing as a situation and trying to lead the G20. We were very confident in terms of what we can put on the table. And I think that through these almost 40 meetings that already have occurred, we have been able to play a role as an honest broker, as an idea of a country that has good relationships with all the countries of the G20, that wants to put our table, as we do in our culture, to have an honest dialogue, to try to build consensus, to find common ground, to try not to promote differences, but more to promote balances, and to also to show, in a way, an optimistic and positive view about globalization, multilateralism, democracy, human rights, and a perspective of a region in the world that wants to have a positive attitude to the 21st century and not a negative attitude. And maybe at the times where more developed countries are having different types of debates because they're in another part of the path. Probably that positive perspective is something that can help at least to take care of preserving these institutions. We always have the balance of asking too much of the G20 or of asking too little of the G20. But I think that probably when this road comes to an end and we handle the keys to Japan presidency, we'll be able to show a in a way, a different G20 than in others in terms of this idea of finding a common ground, a place to meet each other and to debate honestly and find consensus.
What? Okay. When you listen to the minister, I cannot avoid but getting the impression that he must be a fantastic ping pong player. He really enjoys the ping pong. Marcos, I think we are going to set you free. But, you know, Julia and I gave the opening remarks, so it was appropriate that we should be in charge of giving the closing remarks and setting all the people free after 2 days of prison, more or less. But not before. Thank you very much for your presence and your participation, not only in this meeting, but through the whole exercise of the task force's work and the final document that we presented, which I think I reflect quite faithfully what we Argentines think about it, that we fulfill the task and that we are very satisfied with the final results. So having said this, Julia, I don't know if you have anything to add, but many thanks. All the best for Japan. We are sure that they will do their work perfectly well, and also to Saudi Arabia. I think that they can count on us for all the help we can give them. Thank you. Thank you. One last thing. I invite all the T20 team from both institutions and the volunteers to come on stage for the final picture. Come.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank Marcos Peña and all these people. We have now come to an end of the T20 Summit 2018. We hope you enjoyed the summit as much as we did, and would like to thank you all for participating today, especially our speakers and panelists, because this would not have been possible without the help of our sponsors, who are PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Asian Development Bank Institute, the Development Bank of Latin America, the German Development Institute, Emerging Market Sustainability Dialogues, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, the German Corporation for International Cooperation, the International Development Research Center, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Institute for the Integration of Latin America and the Caribbean, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, the Real Instituto Elcano, the United Nations Development Programme, the Liberal Network for Latin America, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, the World Bank Group, Accenture, Aerolíneas Argentinas, BBVA francés, Grupo Peñaflor, Pampa Energía, Puente, Quilmes, and Bodega Vistalba. We would also like to thank our supporting partners, the G20 Argentina 2018. Once again, thank you all for coming, and we hope you're looking forward to the next T20 Summit in Japan the next year. Thank you very much.
Nos organizamos.